It looks bad. In fact, it looks like it could happen on 4 or 5 November. The reason I bring that up, it just so happens to be a full moon, which would lend credence to the argument that lunatics are ruling us in Washington, D.C. You've gone down the list of reasons, and there are a couple that I would add because I recently went into D.C. and I talked to some people. Some of the people I talked to are just below the decision maker level. And these are the usual smug resume builders who come in and out through every administration, hoping that at some point they'll get a high level appointment. And they said a couple of things that I thought were interesting. First, they said, well, you got to understand, Doug, we're flipping the chessboard on Russia and China. I said, what? Oh, yes, don't you understand? By going into Venezuela, we're saying a very strong message because Russia and China have tried to build up and cultivate support there, and we're telling them that they can't do it. We're flipping the chessboard. Well, I said, well, I don't think the Russians are prepared to fight for Venezuela. In fact, I know that Putin has given very explicit instructions to the Venezuelans. You're on your own. We'll give you equipment and assistance if we can, but forget it. We're not going to fight for you. The Chinese certainly aren't going to send the Chinese Navy to the Caribbean to stand off and fight us. That's not going to happen. And I said that. I said, so, you can't make this argument that this has some great strategic value that justifies this enormous task force. And, it ultimately boiled down to it's time for us to be strong again. As though bombing hapless people in Venezuela or Colombia or Nicaragua or anywhere in Latin America is testimony to our greatness as a nation. And then, of course, the final straw is, well, we've got to destroy the drug problem where it originates. Well, I've got a big flash of the obvious. The drug problem originates here inside the United States. You're not going to get anywhere by bombing Mexico just because Mexico provides most of the fentanyl. And when I say Mexico, we're talking about the cartels. And Mexico's an organized crime state. It has been for a while. They're going to do what they can, but the Mexican army is much more responsive to the cartels than it is to the president of Mexico. So, bombing these places isn't going to stop anything. It's not going to improve anything. It may turn out to rally all of Latin America against us. The evil Yankee who's intervening yet again inside Central and South America. We're blamed for almost everything that's wrong down there. All we're doing is saying, I guess you're right. Look what we're doing now. It's not going to change anything. But that means you've got to come home. This seems to be the thing that no one in Washington wants to do. Somebody said, Doug, what do you want to come home for? We have troops all over the place. What do you want to come back here for? I said, because what happens here is far more important and existential for us than anything beyond our borders. The world has changed. Putting little packets of troops or ships here or there isn't going to stop things from happening overseas. They're going to happen whether we like it or not. And the good news is most of what happens beyond our borders doesn't matter to us. It's not a reflection on us. We need to focus here. And I said, if you exercise some restraint right now, you bring the forces back to the United States, defend the borders, defend the coastal waters, and then crack down on the peddlers. And I would add child trafficking to the drug trafficking.
Of course.
And I would impose the death penalty for anybody who engages in it. That means you're going to go to trial, and if you're found guilty, you're going to face the death penalty. Everybody says, oh, that's terrible. But it's okay to bomb Venezuela. Don't execute the drug peddler or the child trafficker, but let's bomb Venezuela. Doesn't make any damn sense whatsoever. That's where people's heads are right now in Washington, D.C. Well, you bring something up that's very interesting. Somebody pointed out to me just the other day, Benjamin Franklin told the population that was standing out in front of Independence Hall when they asked, what sort of government do we have now, Mr. Franklin? This is after the Constitutional Convention. He said, well, you have a republic if you can keep it. And he said, we need to change that because today, if Ben Franklin came back, he would say, you have a drama queen republic if you can keep it.
Yeah.
We have a lot of frivolous theatrics in Washington that passes for diplomacy and policy. We have a president, and you know that I like the president personally, always have. But everything is about theatrics and optics and appearances. And now we have the Prime Minister of Japan, who just made wonderful deals for Japan with us, by the way. Japan is going to continue to buy oil and gas from Russia. There will be no change in that. Japan is going to invest more in the United States. We're already heavily invested here as it is. That's not a big deal. Although Toyota has since come back and said, we're not increasing our investment. Sorry, we didn't make that promise. But she gave Donald Trump the most expensive set of golf clubs in world history. They're beautiful, they're magnificent, and she promised that she would nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize. And suddenly, President Trump says, this has been a big success. We are winning. So now he goes on to South Korea. I'm sure he'll get some similar treatment there. And oh, by the way, I see no evidence that India is going to stop buying oil and gas from Russia either. And now we have this ceasefire that was declared a few weeks ago that's just completely disastrously violated by the Israelis. And everybody says, okay, that's fine. So what are we dealing with? We're dealing with facades, illusions. And I think Venezuela is another illusion. Instead of doing exactly what you've suggested, turning inward, focusing here at home on what's important, bring the forces back. If we'll exercise some restraint now, we'll build more capability for the future. But there is no long-term planning. We launched a tariff war. There's no stability in the tariff regime. It's driving everyone crazy. They talk about the dollar as reserve currency. That's all shifting into pure gold now. Ask Nassim Taleb. Ask Ray Dalio. Ask anybody. Gold is the new reserve currency. We're not even prepared for that world. We're not paying attention to it. Let's bomb Venezuela. Let's bomb Colombia. Let's punish those bastards. They're the ones that created this drug problem. No, they're not. They're feeding an appetite in North America for something that people will pay a lot of money for. Crack down on the appetite at home, secure the borders, the coastal waters, and stay out of Central and South America. Well, I think you have an answer of sorts. And it comes, interestingly enough, from Mrs. Machado. I don't know if she's married or not, so I call her Mrs. She may just be Miss Machado. She's the lady that just won the Nobel Peace Prize, and she's from Venezuela. And she said, if we're liberated by the U.S. armed forces and they remove Maduro, our first act will be to move the Venezuelan embassy to Jerusalem. Can't be that confused. I think she's hit on something very important. She's figured out where the power lies, and she's playing to the audience that makes the decisions. You're talking about this democracy business. We've always been a republic with limited democracy, but I think we can pretty much conclude that we're ruled now by a small group of extraordinarily wealthy people. Billionaire oligarchs. Those are the terms they use in Eastern Europe and places like Ukraine.
Yeah.
I think they're in charge. I think they're calling the shots. And I think there are interests in the oil resources, oil and gas primarily, although let's face it, they've got gold mines and emerald mines as well, and other things. I'm told they have a lot of lithium. There may be a true interest in putting in a puppet government and finding a way to extract these resources, because right now, for the first time in 30 years, all the central banks beyond the borders of the United States around the world hold more gold than we do. That's a very important thing to understand. So how do you begin to reverse this process of managed decline, which is really what we've been on now for the last 25 years? Well, oil is part of it. Oil is gold. And even though the oil is exactly what you described, it's heavy oil, high sulfur content, requires a lot of refining. But still, we have the best oil engineers in the world, especially for deep drilling. It will probably, for the same amount of money we pay for 1 barrel of oil out of the ground in the United States, we can probably get 2 out of Venezuela. It's still not as good as Iran or Libya, where you could probably get 3 barrels out for what we spend to drill in the United States. But it doesn't look like we're going to get control of the Iranian oil fields. And I think we've bullied the Emirates and the Saudis about as much as we can at the moment. And Iran stands defiant. So look for another war in the Middle East while all of this is unfolding, because Israel's objectives aren't met. Neither are the objectives of the New York and London banks. I think we're in a lot of trouble financially, and there's a genuine interest in controlling resources to offset that crisis. In part.
But I mean, would it actually take an invasion? I mean, Lindsey Graham was salivating at the idea of boots on the ground in Venezuela. That'll confuse the crap out of most Americans if that happens. But why not just go to Maduro? I think he offered.
Well, that's what I was just going to tell you, that we didn't have to go to Mr. Maduro. He came to us.
Right.
And in fact, President Trump was questioned in the Oval Office last week. And they said, we understand that Mr. Maduro approached you through intermediaries, no doubt, and offered you a very lucrative deal. I'm told it was about a stake in the oil and gas industry, all sorts of things like that. And he replied, he said, oh, yes, it was not just a good deal. He offered everything. And so people looked and said, was that not enough? No, that's not enough. I think there's something else going on here beyond that.
Clearly.
That's what I'm asking. I asked people, and some people have said, well, you remember Venezuela was involved in that Dominion software scandal. Remember that Dominion software was developed for Hugo Chavez. I said, okay, maybe this is a personal grudge match. I don't know. But I do know that there's this feeling that President Trump needs a win. He wants a win. He's not going to get a win out of Ukraine. Doesn't look like he's going to get a win out of the Middle East. So where does he go for a win? 77 million people voted for exactly what you're describing. There's no question about it. But I don't think that is necessarily the kind of theater that Washington's interested in. And I don't think people on the Hill, may also include friends of President Trump and others, are necessarily going to profit from any of that activity. I mean, we're watching an awful lot of huge $100 million, $1 billion deals closed all over the place by people connected back to Washington right now. That's not new. We saw that under the Biden and Clinton administrations, but it's certainly vulgar and out in the open right now. You don't close those kinds of deals by shutting down the drug trade and the child trafficking in Philadelphia or Seattle or anywhere else. Well, they're drawn into it because it's a wonderful platform for them to display their decisiveness, their strength, their courage, their leadership. That's the way people think of it. But you're right. It's an illusion. And you know what? I know President Trump from the standpoint of foreign policy to some extent. It was very clear to me the last time I spoke with him and worked with him that he wanted to get our forces out of Europe. Now, very recently, nobody's paid any attention to it, but suddenly we're finally withdrawing troops from Romania and Bulgaria. That's a very wise thing to do. Thank God. Let's get them out of Poland, get them out of Lithuania, start pulling them out of Germany. We don't need those forces over there. And the Europeans don't need those forces. There is no threat to Europe from Russia. I think he knows that. I think he knows that China isn't going to invade Taiwan. And so you see him moving through Asia diplomatically and behind the scenes. Everybody is telling him, we're not supporting a war with China. China is not a military threat to us. I think he understands that. So I think he wants to focus at home. But this thing in the Caribbean basin is clearly not an original idea on his part. He agrees the threat from Central and South America, but particularly Central America, is very serious. He knows that. But the issue is, how do you deal with it? And you deal with it along the lines that we've described. But how do you face people who say, well, I don't want you to arrest someone, and then if they're found guilty, punish them with the death penalty if they're trafficking children or they're trafficking drugs. But the same people that object to that will turn around and say, well, I don't want you to bomb innocent people in Venezuela or Colombia. They need to make up their minds. They need to understand what is required, what is necessary for the survival of the country. You're right. You know, we had a dispute over this federal law issue back in 1861. We solved it. It was ugly, but we did it. And we may have to solve it again. I keep wondering when the John Brown moment arrives. We've got a lot of evidence that one is coming, because we can't let governors and mayors stand there and pour filth and abuse all over our federal laws and simply say, no, we won't enforce them. And by the way, we regard you and your police forces as the enemy.
Yeah.
It's insane. My impression is that since President Trump concluded that he wasn't going to get a ceasefire that he could tout as another great foreign policy achievement like the last ceasefire in Gaza, he's lost interest. I think he knows that he can't settle that. But remember, he made remarks before he was elected, which were very unfortunate, telling everyone I can end this with a phone call in 24 hours. No understanding whatsoever of the problem. That is very unfortunate. The problem is far more serious. By the end of this week, he is going to meet. I think it's in the next few days. It may be next week. I don't know. He's going to be meeting with the leaders of the 5 Central Asian republics, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and so forth. He wants to talk to them about commercial arrangements with us and trade. This is going to be a real serious issue for the Russians and the Chinese. First of all, Moscow has not forgotten our attempted coup at about in January, February of 2022, when we tried to overthrow the government in Uzbekistan. The Russians went in there at the request of the president and stabilized it. This was another one of these color revolutions cooked up by the National Endowment for Democracy, which should be the National Endowment for Anarchy, and of course the CIA, always. The CIA mucks around in Central Asia all the time. We're still pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into places like Afghanistan that are really destined to support subversive elements in Central Asia. The Russians don't like it. They don't want it. Neither do the Chinese. They want stability there. They want to build the One Belt, One Road, which they know will bring prosperity to the people of Central Asia. And they also have a long memory. They don't want Central Asia to become what it was a few hundred years ago, which was the greatest force in the world under someone like Genghis Khan. And people laugh. Well, you don't understand Central Asia and the people that live there. But they could be mobilized. They could be united and present a real danger to everyone. The Russians and the Chinese understand this. They don't want that to happen. But we're in the business of subverting and destabilizing. And this visit now will not be treated as something positive in Moscow. They will see this as another attempt to undermine Russian and Chinese security. That's a meeting he doesn't need to hold. But he's going everywhere. He's selling America. That's his argument. I don't think people understand the implications. So the bottom line is President Trump has great instincts, but then he walks into the swamp and he gets mugged early. And people distract him into areas where he's not familiar. And they're going to put an end to his presidency if they drag him into Venezuela. That place is a terrible, terrible mess for us. We can't fix it. We shouldn't try. Let the people that live there do it. And if they say, well, they can't, well, that's their problem. It's their home.
Yeah.
Remember, Venezuela has 1,700 miles of coastline, 1,370-mile border with Colombia, 1,380-mile border with Brazil. And I'm being told by people with experience down there that you've got 100,000 paramilitaries along their border in Brazil and Colombia that are just can't wait to go into Venezuela and fight us if we go into that country. And this sort of thing will spread. It's the last thing that we need. What we need is stability and peace. I would urge the president to reconsider his rejection of this proposal from Maduro and get out of this business of regime change, particularly when you know that somebody like Machado is playing to the wrong audience. Well, what a joke. Why are we trying to install this woman? It makes no sense.
Well, because she'll bring gay marriage to Venezuela, and that's important. I mean, that's what we stand for.
Well, you've got some real criminals. Let me just finish up here real quick. On the hills around Caracas, you've got as many as 8,000 Colombian drug criminals. They're there. There's no question about it. Maduro has clamped down on them, contrary to what people here think. He's holding them in check. That's not an easy thing to do in Latin America. As you know, you visited El Salvador.
Yep.
You know the region. You know what it's like. This woman can't do that. So my point is that if you don't like it now, it'll get a lot worse if we go in there. Well, the short answer is no. I just wanted to wish everybody a happy Halloween and point out that I made an exception. This is a high druidic holiday in my family. So I had to part ways with some of my fellow druids who are headed out to the Glen here for the big celebration later tonight.
I'm sure you can join them.
Well, it's getting tougher and tougher, you know. We're running out of virgins. What can I say? Anyway, I think President Trump has made some interesting remarks that don't hold up to closer scrutiny. I don't know why he says something that I think most people that know anything at all about nuclear arsenals are well aware that we do not have more nuclear weapons than anybody else in the world. In fact, that's unquestionably Russia. Now, people will get into delivery means and launchers and those other things, but let's just keep it simple. The Russians have the most.
Why would we be testing them? And why would he say immediately when his advisors must be telling him, you can't do this immediately? My research, correct me if yours is different and your understanding is superior to mine, says it takes a couple of years to put into play a test of a nuclear weapon.
Well, first of all, that's probably true. I don't know the exact time frame, but let's keep something in mind. You don't have to test nuclear weapons if you are a developed nuclear power. The people that have an interest in testing are those trying to develop the nuclear weapons. So the bottom line is we know, the Russians know, and the Chinese know that their weapons work. So do the British and the French. So I'm not sure we need to test. And we signed the test ban that was renewed in 1996. I don't know why he would want to unilaterally depart from that. Now, strictly speaking, even though the president signed the treaty, it was never ratified by the Senate. But nevertheless, we've abided by it. It's like a lot of other things that we saw wisdom in following, despite the fact that perhaps others didn't. So I don't understand it. I don't know what he's up to. It doesn't make any sense to me. This is the worst thing I can conceive of at this point. Don't we have enough tension in the world?
Right. And don't we have the need for acquiescence and compatibility and communication with the Russians rather than something like this? Chris, do you have the full screen of what the Donald J. Trump? This is hogwash, isn't it?
Yeah, largely it is. It sounds as though he had an idea, and as usual, he didn't run it by anybody, or if he did, they were afraid to say anything. That's always a possibility. There's one good piece of news that I think, based on his recent experience, he has discovered that unlike money, you can't print missiles. So he now has an understanding that we have a supply deficit in the defense system. In other words, we can't surge and rapidly produce large numbers of missiles. Perhaps that recognition in the back of his mind led him to the conclusion, well, perhaps we ought to test. I don't know. It's hard to explain. It doesn't make sense.
If the Russians have 4,800 and we have 3,400, these things can destroy the earth. Why would anybody need 4,800 and anybody else need 3,400?
No, a friend of mine who met the man who was the key figure in the development of the French nuclear force asked the man who developed the nuclear weapons, how many nuclear warheads do you think you really need? And he said, that's an easy answer. One. He said, one's enough. It's so bad, no one is going to risk it. So who knows?
All right. You and I intended to be speaking on, is President Trump lying us into another war? And I want to talk about Venezuela. But before we do, is he about to lie us into a war with Iran?
Well, that's a good question. Is he backpedaling finally? Is he finally coming to the conclusion that, contrary to his initial claims that he did not successfully end the war between Israel and Iran, is he being told by the Israelis that they're getting ready to attack? What is it? What's the purpose? I don't know. I mean, we've told so many lies so many times about so many things, it's hard to sort through them. I just went back before you came on this afternoon, just for my own edification, and reread some of the material on the Gulf of Tonkin revolution.
Oh, good Lord.
And, that was one big lie. And right. I think what we've been hearing about Venezuela is a big lie. And I think pretty soon people are realizing that we've lied a great deal about Iran. That doesn't seem to matter. And it doesn't seem to matter very much because Congress is not helping the matter. Very few people are raising the issue. I mean, I listened to Senator Rand Paul. He spoke very intelligently on the subject, others from time to time. But on the whole, the notion of checks and balances in this government of three branches, they don't seem to operate, Judge. And so, frankly, whatever the president wants to do, he's going to do.
Chris, do we have Senator poll with Senator Kaine on one of the Sunday talk shows from last Sunday. While Chris is looking for it, the initial part of this is the administration hasn't even briefed the Congress. They haven't even told us what their plans are. They are apparently prepared to just do something. Now, this begins with something from the president, because apparently the host of this show, I don't remember who it is, ran this for Senator Kaine and Senator Paul. And then you'll hear Senator Paul's rather, in my view, and I think yours, articulate response. Chris?
Because the truth of the matter is, if he went to the Congress, of course, he'd have to do some groundwork before he went, and simply said, I want a declaration of war against illegal drug trafficking. And that's what I'm going to fight. And I want special permissions, special provisions to do that. I wouldn't be surprised if he was widely supported, Judge. But he hasn't done that. And so all of these attacks are worse than extrajudicial. They're just wanton murder. Now, that doesn't mean that I or you or anybody else wants to protect people in those boats on the grounds that they have a right to move drugs. That's not the point. We don't know who we're killing. We don't know who we've hurt. We are behaving like a drunk, in a glass factory, smashing everything in sight. It's a catastrophe. It's hurting us. It's hurting him. And he should know better.
And it establishes a horrific precedent. I mean, suppose God save us from this, but suppose a President AOC or a President Gavin Newsom wanted to use this power against people who were not arguably involved in crimes, but Trump did it, and the Congress didn't stop him. I mean, this is the way these things happen. President Trump killed General Soleimani. President Obama killed Anwar al-Awlaki. Neither of them was involved in any act of violence at the time. Neither of them had raised a finger against the United States. Neither of them had been accused of a crime, but they both were evaporated by presidential order, just like these guys in the boats. What argument would the president make to justify a naval or air or, God forbid, land invasion of Venezuela? That they're the heartthrob of drug manufacturing and distribution, and therefore we have to wipe out the government of the country?
Well, clearly that's the cover story. That's ultimately being presented to the American public as justification. Because Judge, the American people, you tell most Americans at any given point in time, we're going after drug lords, we're destroying cartels, this man's a drug criminal. Everyone will sort of rally around and say, good, go get him. Americans aren't getting all the details. They don't know the whole story. I mean, LBJ, when he decided he wanted to start the war in Vietnam, he lied his way into it, but he had help. He picked up the phone and he called Barry Goldwater, who was the majority leader in the Senate. And he said, I need your support, Barry. I want to go to Vietnam. I want to kill these people, et cetera, et cetera. And Barry Goldwater said, you have my support. So when LBJ went public and he said, we've taken fire and we have to respond, the old story, if we don't respond, it will be appeasement and it will get worse and so forth.
Right.
He got what he wanted. Everybody else lined up. Within a few days, you had the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. And at the time, the interesting part is there was one naval officer, a Navy commander, who was working in the Pentagon. I think he was in the Joint Staff, and he called a couple of offices in the Senate. And he told the people, I don't know what offices these were, but he specifically told the chiefs of staff, this is a lie. There is no incident as outlined. This is not true. This is a lie. Don't support this. And they thanked him, but they did nothing. Wow. And I think that's our problem right now, that frankly, if President Trump goes in there, in fact, I got to take you back to something you taught me. I think it was last year. I asked you what you thought about Congress's failure to exercise its responsibilities. And you told me the Charlie Rangel story.
Right. The Charlie Rangel story is, because I asked him about this while President Obama was using the CIA to bomb and destroy the government of Libya. This was Hillary Clinton's concoction. We saw he died. She made that famous, horrific, morally relativistic statement. And Rangel said, well, you know what? If it's successful, we'll applaud him. And if it's a failure, it's his fault. That's the attitude that many members of Congress will take, Colonel.
Yeah, and yet James Madison made the argument on more than one occasion. The reason the government was set up as it was because they could not be certain that the office of the president would always be in the hands of an enlightened leader.
Right. This is not an enlightened leader, but this person gets to whisper in the president's ear whenever they play golf together, which apparently is a couple times a week. And I don't know if he's recounting what the president has told him, but this is dangerous, treacherous, and dastardly. Chris, cut number 11. Either a lunatic or he is articulating what he believes the president is going to do, a land invasion of Venezuela, Colombia, and Cuba.
Well, let me pay tribute to whoever writes some of his material, because he used this word caliphate. And you may remember that back at the beginning of this century, we were listening to all sorts of people tell us about the emergence of the global caliphate, and that if we did not commit to this endless war against the emerging global caliphate, the whole world would fall into darkness and be ruled by Islamist fanatics. So by using the word caliphate and equating it to drug traffickers, ostensibly in Venezuela, he's going to convince a lot of people in his state and other places that this is something we absolutely must do. So you got to give the man credit for that. Now, having said that, I've been down this road a couple of times and I've watched people commit to action, and then you discover a number of different things. First of all, what do you strike? What are the legitimate military targets that you're going to go after? When we began the Kosovo air campaign, we had roughly 120 legitimate military targets in the entire country of Yugoslavia. Now, stop and consider that for a minute. And that was supposed to be the basis for an air campaign that could go on for months. So what happened? Well, people were told, you better go back and find military targets for us. Well, we don't have any military installations to hit. Well, then you start interpreting things as potentially military or have potential intelligence value or propaganda, and suddenly your target list grows and you hit lots of things that, quite frankly, are irrelevant. You start destroying bridges, you destroy harbors, you destroy all sorts of things because you're desperate to find something to hit before you go in. What do you think the number of legitimate military targets happens to be in Venezuela? I doubt that there are very many there. So you could launch 2 days of strikes, and that's it. You're out of business. There's nothing else that you can legitimately hit. But that won't stop us, based upon my experience. They'll start finding reasons to hit other things. And now you're talking about going in on the ground. Go in on the ground to do what? Are we going to arrest Maduro? Or do we hope that he's going to be killed by a strike? Are we there to secure the presidential palace for the alleged successor, Mrs. Machado, pending, obviously, an election which the CIA will make sure turns out the right way? I don't know. Again, as Senator Paul said, and Senator Kaine, who was in that interview, there's been no briefing, no presentation. At least LBJ called people, and he did tell people on the Senate Armed Services Committee and so forth what he was going to do. They presented no resistance and asked no questions. But the bottom line is, at least something happened this time around. He obviously doesn't plan to do anything. And I don't see a throng of congressmen or senators demanding entry to the White House.
One of the websites, I think it was Zero Hedge, reported this afternoon, following up on what Senator Graham said, that the invasion of Venezuela was imminent. And the president tweeted, we're not going to invade Venezuela. Well, who would believe that? We have 10,000 Marines there. We have the largest aircraft carrier in the world there. The aircraft carrier has numerous other naval vessels to support it. You understand this far better than I. What are they doing there if we're not going to invade?
Well, I don't think the aircraft carrier battle group is there yet. They're steaming in that direction. It could be that because of the weather, the hurricanes in the Caribbean and in that region, they may have been delayed. But I doubt seriously they will launch any significant operation against Venezuela until that entire naval battle group has arrived. The other thing is you have 10,000 troops, but they're army, and they're sitting up there in Puerto Rico. Ostensibly, they'll be flown and perhaps they'll parachute into Venezuela. I have no idea. You have about 2,500 to 3,000 Marines offshore with the flotilla that's already offshore from the Navy. There's several thousand sailors, obviously. We have F-35 jets parked on runways. We have bombers ready to go. I mean, clearly, if we want to go into Venezuela, there's very little the Venezuelan military can do to stop us. The question is, again, for what purpose? And we've not been told that, because if you bring up regime change, everybody says, "Oh, no, that's not what it's about." Oh, so we're just going to bomb in and around the neighborhood where our friend Maduro lives, and once he sees that we're on the ground, he's going to come out, welcome us, and sign an agreement or something? I mean, the whole thing is crazy.
It is. It is. Before we go, Colonel, this is going to sound a little off the wall, but Stephen Miller is the president's principal advisor on everything from military strikes to the Department of Justice to Homeland Security to ICE. He's a personal advisor to the president. He's not nominated and confirmed by the Senate. The position doesn't require Senate confirmation. Where does he live?
Well, first of all, I don't know, but if I did, I wouldn't mention it on the air. I mean, I've had death threats. A lot of people in Washington have had death threats, and I wouldn't be surprised if people in this administration aren't seriously concerned. And so they may have decided it's much easier to protect the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, and other key members of the administration by placing them on the reservation at Fort McNair or across the river.
Is it unusual for senior administration officials to be residing in officers' quarters?
Yes,
in military installations.
Yes, yeah. When Secretary Perry, for instance, was Secretary of Defense, he rented a townhome that faced the river in Old Town Alexandria, and was picked up there every morning and driven to the building. So yeah, it is unusual. But we don't know what else is happening. And, we've got serious problems right now financially speaking. I mean, we have 47 million people on food stamps, and we have a government that's shut down. People are already privately saying, we can't do this very long. If this gets worse, there could be serious unrest in the United States. We have a lot of people inside the United States who are very well organized in ways that have not been the case in the past, whether it's Antifa or a number of front organizations. Are also very well funded. And we saw Antifa show up at Tucker Carlson's home in Washington, D.C. That was a very frightening experience for his wife and family. That could happen. And under the circumstances, we probably don't have enough police or Secret Service. So I'm not really surprised. It's disturbing, but it's not without reason, Judge.
Thank you, Colonel. Colonel, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you for your willingness late in the day on a Friday to address these difficult issues. Thank you for your double duty. Now will you go off and join the Druids?
I will. I'm getting my robes ready as we speak. And by the way, we're getting a big bonfire and so forth. But I wanted to share something I read that I thought perfectly describes our situation in Washington. I guess this was 2 years ago, and Jerome Powell, when he was the Fed chair, was being questioned. He got very frustrated, and he looked out at the audience when they began asking questions about long-term predictions and anticipated changes in interest rates, so forth. He said, well, frequently we have to navigate under cloudy skies. Well, I would say we are navigating under extremely dense cloud cover right